Hello everyone. This video on the women of the Golden Hive, or the Amazons. I will be reading from a text I received from Thoth, I would say 2002 about, but I will also be giving current commentary as I go along. The picture you see on the screen is the Wonder Woman of 2017. As I was trying to find some images to go along with my information on the Amazons, I came across Wonder Woman, and it turns out, at least in the 2017 version, she is an Amazon. And there are a lot of other interesting things about her that are very related to Thoth's version of the Amazons. I definitely want to see this movie. I haven't as yet. My friend of mine actually told me about it just like 2 weeks before. Well, I'd heard that it was out there, but I'm not really interested that much in superheroes movies. They're usually very comic book done, you know. But my friend said, oh, this one's really good. That's all he really said about it. But then, you know, I Google Amazons and I come up with her. So no coincidence here, I don't think. I have already actually just finished making this video, all 45 minutes of it, and I found out that I had not properly turned on the sound. So if I sound a little tired, it's because I am, but I don't want to lose the momentum of the new information which I received, which I don't have written down anywhere. So I'm back at it again, and here we go for another round. I did just now find a way you can check your microphone to see that it is working, because I'm using Zoom and I can't check it like I could in the other. So I found it now, so hopefully it is working. It seems to be, and we will begin. The record of Thoth has revealed that the lineage of Yeshua descended in part from the Amazons. It also tells us that the name Amazon was derived from a Mazur, which means of the Mazur. The Mazur were the major post-Atlantean Grail family. But just who are the Amazons? Their legend is as powerful as King Arthur's and nearly as little known historically. What little recorded history we have on them tells us that the Amazons were all female warriors within the Hittite Empire, consisting of Asia, including Turkey, from 1400 BC through 323 BC. They were believed to be quite fierce, especially toward men. It is also believed that they would capture men and conceive by them, killing the infants as if they were male, and keeping them if they were female. However, in the book Priestesses by Norma Laurie Goodrich, she writes, the German scholar Boschofen accused the early Greek heroes of being foes of the Amazons, who were real priestesses and women warriors. He charged the Greek heroes, not only salted the earth of Asia so that the inhabitants would thereafter die from starvation, they primarily combated women and the Asian social system. When conquerors destroy the social structure of a civilization, deprive that society of its beliefs, customs, usages, and hierarchy, they effectively extinguish it completely. In Asia, the last bright sparks of light were the Asian priestesses who took up arms against foreign conquerors. These brave women, prepared to die on the spot, were your now fabled Amazons, said he. Now we go to Thoth, or the Akashic of Thoth. The Amazons began as a single tribe of women priestesses in the latter days of Atlantis. The Melchizedekian temples of Atlantis had been usurped by the male priests, killing and imprisoning the female oracles. Some oracles from the temples escaped, many fleeing to distant lands. One was the priestess Concha, a beautiful, tall, flame-haired woman with Hyperborean blood who had been born on the Atlantean isle of Ruta. Joining her in her flight were two other Melchizedekian priestesses named Zunia and Rachel. That's sort of like Rachel, Rachal, also of Hyperborean Rutan blood. They established an oracle seat in the locale of the city of Smyrna, now Izmir. They were not warriors, but for obvious reasons were wary of men and thus initiated a policy exclusive of males in their sacred order. They did administer to both male and females who sought their vision, counsel, and healing arts. While still of childbearing age, they wished to perpetuate their lineage. These women were not only of cosmic Hyperborean heritage, but also contained some Atlantean Grail Queen blood as well. The Atlantean Grail kings and queens were the original families of Melchizedek, who migrated to Atlantis from Lemuria. Were the original families of Melchizedek, who migrated to Atlantis from Lemuria. The three oracles then began to select males from among scattered colonies in their immediate region to father their children. This was always with the consent of the male involved, and the sons were given to the fathers and their people, while the daughters were kept by the priestesses. Gradually, a small tribe of oracle priestesses was established in this manner. But they were not yet Amazons. They called themselves Conchi, in honor of the founding priestess Concha. The Conchi maintained 5 sanctuaries, the main sanctuary on Avera, which is Samos, another at Kyi'Ra, Smyrna, and 3 others in Ephesus, Cyprus, and one near Antioch in Syria. Centuries after the Atlantean deluge, a branch of the Mizur Grail lineage migrated to this same region of Turkey. By this time, the main sanctuary for the Conchi was on an island later to be named Samos by the Greeks. While the Conchi had other sanctuaries, it was on Samos, then known as Avera, that the most highly regarded of their oracles resided. It was not long after their arrival that the Mizur Grail lineage group discovered the Conchi. They knew from certain myths among the people of that region that these women were their distant relations. They were, in the syntax of the Grail families, pure-born. Certain elect males of this particular Mizur tribe began to practice highly specific and spiritually powerful ceremonial conception rituals with the Conchi oracles on Avera. In order to truly appreciate the intention of these Mizur priests and the Conchi, it is important to understand that lengthy deliberation was placed upon the decision to recreate these sacred ancient conception rites. When we think of such practices, we tend to imagine wild ceremonies in which men and women drink themselves into a stupor and pair at random under a full moon. Such subconscious images are the creation of much later times, both as a product of certain fallen pagan practices and of the Christian Church. The Church tried to instill fear within the hearts of those under their jurisdiction for the purpose of further annihilating the goddess aspects of the Christ and the sacred Grail blood mysteries from the face of the earth. Thus, these images and perceptions do not at all describe the original sacred conception rituals of the ancients. Pausing for a sip of water. As I said, I'm redoing this all, so my voice is fading. These ceremonies were instead planned between the individuals way in advance and involved numerous stages of spiritual purification and preparation beforehand. It was a form of sacred marriage, although the commitment for the individuals involved was not lifelong. For the male, his obligation was to submit to the months of purification and instruction using certain spiritual symbols and what we would now call yogic procedures. In addition, he was expected to give a dowry to that temple in support of the child through the first 3 years of its life. Should it be a female, If the offspring was a male, the father would take this child and, with his wife and other female surrogate, such as a mother, sister, aunt, etc., raise the boy as an equal to his other or future children. Such male children from the womb of the Conchi were considered the finest of royalty among the Mizur, who were already a royal Grail lineage, and the other peoples of the region were considered the finest royalty among the Mizur and the other people of the region. Since the priestesses of the Conchi were quite well versed in the art of spiritually requesting female children from the angelics who oversaw such matters, only a small number of these pregnancies turned out to be male, and those were only because of higher level requests by these angelics that the Conchi served the spiritual hierarchy in this way when needed. I need to refine this particular part here. They weren't just sending in a request to a bunch of angels up there in the cosmos. We're all connected to angelic frequencies, and these frequencies are part of the consummation act. Not only the sexual act, but the whole, what happens to the egg and the ovum and this and that, and why we get some females here and we get some males there, the X chromosome and the whole package, so to speak. And so they were able to access that vibrational frequency. And yes, it was a form of request, but, it was really a scientific type of thing using high frequency ordination. The responsibility of the female also involves spiritual purification and preparation, very similar to that required of the males. She was expected to nurse and raise the girl child close by her side until she reached the age of 6. At this time, her daughter was sent to a special enclave where she learned her counsel skills. Not her counsel skills, her Conchi skills. In her 16th cycle of life, she would be sent to one of the Conchi sanctuaries as an oracle. During these years, from 6 onward, the child was permitted to visit the mother at certain times. Again, I need to pause here. This sounds very, austere, and the poor child taken from her mother after being so close to her at age 6, how terrible, and all of this. But you need to understand that this was a different cultural frequency, for one thing. And the child was raised to understand that, but also genetically, when you're raised in a particular cultural belief system or vibration, the genetics of that child held a proclivity to that understanding. Even in current times, if a child, like a little infant in a third world country, is adopted by a Western family, say, and they're taken immediately out of that family, they couldn't possibly have absorbed mentally any of the culture at that time. They already have a genetic frequency of that culture in them, and some of that is going to remain, even though they're largely westernized. It's not just a racial thing. It is the frequency of that culture that still has a certain prevalence in, or presence in their reactions to life, even within the far distant culture that they're being raised in. So these children in that accord did not suffer from that separation. Also, they were able to still remain connected in the inner plane to their mothers, and they saw them, and the children visited the mothers, and the mothers visited the children on the etheric level. So this physical visit that was permitted by the mothers at certain times was just part of the whole nurturing that the mothers still continued with that child. And also, I don't believe I mentioned this. Let me see. See, I can't remember if I mentioned it last time or I also mentioned it this time. That the whole idea of family orientation, close-knit family, one mate for life, the children, the family, the whole thing that we have now that we don't treat very well, and we haven't for a long time. But it's part of our process of developing a spiritual closeness to the family of humanity through the vessels of our offspring and our mate in life. And of course, different cultures see it differently. I'm speaking mostly of the Western cultures at this time. And as I said, they greatly abuse that. But the higher vibration is to love humanity in that way, to feel the closeness between all humans on the earth that way. And this was what the earlier periods were designed to do, where they didn't have just one mate forever and ever in that lifetime. And they didn't have the children all close to them until they, grew up and got an apartment and a car. I mean, they maintained the closeness through this inner etheric thing and this networking of spirituality. But they also were all embodied with the concept of loving all humanity in that way. And if their child went away to somewhere at age 6, they didn't really go away. This was part of this whole greater understanding of love and in humanity. It's carrying the blood lineage, the red road, to a higher frequency that's much closer to the white path. In the year 5482 BC, a nomadic warring tribe of primitive people began to raid the sanctuaries of the Conchi. These warring people were the descendants of the children of the Nephilim. You can translate that as the Anunnaki, the product of genetic experimentation by them in the Assyrian lands. Many of the priestesses were killed, but as in the days of Atlantis, some were able to escape. They fled into other parts of Asia, some returning to Turkey centuries later. As they traveled into unknown territory, the people of these regions who knew of the Mazur then called these women the Amazur. In later periods, they were also known in some regions as Amazala. The Amazur's name for themselves was Anikavi, the women of the golden hive. The word kavi meant hive. However, if it were spoken in a specifically accented way, it meant precious, royal, or golden hive. The Ani, which I don't write about here, is the the sacred light. Ani is to cleave to the light, to bring close to the breast the light of the golden hive, in other words. The Anikavi were still oracles, but they also trained their women to be warriors so that they could hopefully never again be decimated as a people. They also referred to themselves as bees and doves, for both were symbols of the royal Mazur Grail lineages. Now, at that early time of the Anikavi, they were still not like flaming warriors out there, just attacking people and whatever. They were defensive. They protected themselves. And they protected others who were weak and not able to protect themselves, that were of, a descendant lineage of their own peoples in the region and whatever. So, and that grew even to protecting people that weren't descended directly from them, but that were helpless and needed help. So they were kind of Wonder Woman types, right there. They were helping the inflicted, but they used their swords. They used their swords to do that. Now, during this period of time, and I'm going to start speaking here of what I've written because I don't really explain it too well in this article, this particular part that I'm going into here. Well, a little bit. I'll read some of it. During this era of their history, they no longer enjoyed having the pure lineage of the Mazur Grail priests to choose from in fathering their offspring. Now, when we're speaking of pure lineages here, we're not doing it, talking about anything other than those genetics that were still operating in a high frequency of experience. They could be in any racial type. Any racial type could contain the genetics of that high light frequency. So it wasn't a racial type they were seeking. The Mazur lineage, although the strain that the Amazons came out of was more Nordic, the whole of the Mazur lineage was very, different colored, different racially aspected at different times, because they moved through different populations and whatever. But they maintained the frequency of the Mazur lineage by procreating with peoples who had that frequency, regardless of the racial type. So when we're speaking of pure born, pure lineages, we're speaking of spiritually pure. not perfect, but, you know, spiritual lineages, the pure vibration of that, not of any specific racial type, because they were maintained in all races. I don't make that really clear here, and I wish I had, but anyway, I'm making it clear now. Thus, they took the best they could find at that time, many times these males being from among their prisoners of war. The Scythians were descendants of the Amazons after their decline as a true oracle priestess tribe. As the Anikavi became more and more warlike out of their necessity to survive, they also became more nomadic in order to stay ahead of their enemies. This resulted in them fleeing their sacred old ground, as they called it, where they had established oracle sanctuaries and relationships with fragments of the Mizur Grail tribes. Like the Amazons, the Mizur were also forced to migrate, fleeing just before the shadow of the invaders was cast upon them. The result of all this was that the Amazons no longer carried the consciousness, the higher frequency of their Mizur cousins. Now, they still had the DNA of the Mizur, because, you know, you can't escape the DNA. You can go back a zillion lineages and something, you can still find DNA that's related to so-and-so that was related, because it does not play out that fast. But the frequency of the higher spiritual vibration that the Mizur maintained was beginning to decrease. Again, I didn't explain this properly in this paragraph. I must have been half asleep when I wrote it, but it doesn't really say what I wanted to say, so I'm telling you now. In the instances when they used captive males to fulfill their need for paternal sourcing, they got hold of some pretty bad characters. You know, these guys, a lot of them the people they were capturing were not nice people. They were, you know, invading warriors, and they had bloodthirsty DNA and all of this, and yet they were still kind of, you know, they were desperate to procreate during that time, and they brought in some of these frequencies into their lineage, and that wasn't too good. So it really declined their spiritual integrity. It didn't, you know, in the very last stages of the Amazons, when they were completely wiped out, it was because their frequency had been decimated by this other type. And they became more and more warlike. They still weren't horrendous, not like the history books would like to tell you, but they didn't have the solvency of spirit that they originally held when they became, quote unquote, Amazons right out of the Conchi lineage. The ancient city of Ephesus in Turkey was founded by the Amazons, the name Ephesus being derived from an Amazonian queen. The most ancient establishment of Troy, there were many successive ones at the same locale, was established by Amazons as well. Even in the much later period of King Priam's reign, Troy had maintained strong bonds with the Amazons. As a result of these Amazonian ties, the royal family of Troy gave birth to many sons and daughters who were descendants of these warrior priestesses. By that time, however, girls were taken only in tutelage and then given the choice as to which life they wished to live, that of an Amazonian priestess warrior oracle or a life among their paternal family in Troy. The Amazons in the prime of their history were tall yet graceful and usually beautiful women. Most of them had blonde or reddish colored hair and blue or greenish eye color. In their later nomadic years, and there was more of a variation, you know, in their genetic types as they became more nomadic and they wandered about more. As I said, the original Mizur had a lot of different variations in their racial types, but well, not as much as we have today, because there just wasn't that much mixing going on. But the Amazons, originally, when they were the Conchi, they were so preserving themselves in this one little space of time because they were afraid of men, basically, you know, that they kept their sort of Nordic look. But as they wandered and got, you know, involved with other peoples, they became more involved in these different genetic types, not only racial types, but more involved with the, as I said before, the genetics of bad guy warriors who came from really bloodthirsty people, and that was irrespective of what racial type they happened to be. And so that was their downfall at that point in time. Bees were also a symbol of the Solarians, all souls who came from the solar ray, which included those of the Grail families. Certain pre-Incan tribes, known in ancient times as the Incala, practiced a ritual in which a golden drop of honey or nectar came forth from the hive or pituitary to enlighten the initiate in the way of the hive. The swarming of the bees to the golden drop of honey was a humming within the body which gathered force as the Kundalini energy shot up from the spine into the skull. The Amazonian women of the Golden Hive practiced a similar technique. The original Anikavi Amazons were skilled telepathically as well. This formed the basis for yet another analogous trait of the hive, to form collective thought and purpose with each other through telepathy and empathic sensitivity. The Amazons of both the early and later periods often adorned themselves with elaborate tattoos and applied pure oils of almond, lavender, and other aromatherapeutic essences to their skin. They wore jewelry of gold, silver, and many precious stones, although their clothing was very simple and often quite lacking in abundance. They pierced their ears and sometimes their noses in a style similar to that which is now common in India. They were well suited for childbearing and often having as many as 10 to 12 children in a lifetime and still remaining in a vigorous physical condition. In the earlier period of the Conchi, the average lifetime of an Amazon, or pre-Amazon, so to speak, was 110 years. During that era, at the age of 110, a Conchi woman often appeared no older than 40 or 50 by our current standards. In the latter days of their race, however, they often lived no longer than 50, 60 years, and in times of war, far less than that. This was not always due to the mortality rate of war, but also the stress factors which this type of existence brought upon them. Now, if you go to the mid-period, where we had the Anikavi Amazons, when they were kind of really still in their glory and they had a lot of spirituality going for them, then they might not have lived as old as 110, but, well, they did actually. Many of them did, but it wasn't standard. In the days of the Conchi, that was the average lifespan, 110. Like in the days of the early Anikavi, 110 was like 1 out of every 5 women maybe lived that old. The rest were like 90, 85, 90, but they still looked pretty young for their age. The Amazons loved horses, something they were introduced to during the first stages of their nomadic life as the Anikavi. To an Amazon, her horse was her pincha, meaning soul root, or that which anchored her soul to the earth. Next to horses, serpents were most prized, representing to the Amazons, as they did to other goddess-oriented orders, the primal power of the Great Mother. And of course, bees were big on their list as well. The Amazons had no written language, as all of their history, instruction, and poetry were orally transmitted. They did have certain sacred symbols, which contained multiple meanings, but these were used in initiations and did not compose a language per se. These were also used on their marvelous tattoos as well. See, I'm just an old Amazon at heart because I just love to tattoo my avatar. Consequently, in addition to being, excuse me, just a moment. Excuse me, I had to stop for a drink of water very quickly. As I said, my voice is kind of giving out here. In addition to being readers of the Akashic records, the women of the Golden Hive possessed incredible memories through which volumes of history, knowledge, and verse were passed from generation to generation. The importance of the Conchi Amazonian descendancy within the lineage of Yeshua ben Joseph is best viewed from a cosmic genetic perspective. This link served the purpose of bringing an important aspect of the Grail lineage, that of the divine feminine, into the bloodline of the Christ and Master Yeshua. Embodied within Yeshua were all the main strains of the ancient Grail blood, including that of Amazala. This was necessary in order for the totality of the Grail blood to be elevated to the pure form of the Grail's great white way through the body and blood of the Christed Yeshua. Through the act of Holy Communion, so we consume the old generational blood path of the Grail consciousness, and by drawing its sacred etheric nectar into our entire being, we are given opportunity to engage the gleaming white pillar of the Grail temple, the Philosopher's Stone, which represents the alchemical transformation of the elemental worlds into the pure expression of spirit. When I speak of Holy Communion, I'm not just talking about the Catholic communion. One has to take that Holy Communion, whatever form it takes it in, whether it's there in the Catholic Church with the cup and the wine and the bread, or it's out in the field running naked through the woods, or whatever. The way you are experiencing your Holy Communion is the important thing. So how you experience it in the heart is where the Holy Communion truly takes place, irrespective of the ritual that you choose to bring to ignite it in that heart. And so now this brings us to the Holy Family, to Yeshua, to Mother Mary, and to Tor Hannah. So here we are on my Spirit Mythos website, which is now the archival site, archived information. And I'm going to read you about Tor Hannah. It's not very long. According to the Akashic record, Tor Hannah, her more ancient name being Taj-Janok, something like that, but I'm not going to say it again. I'm just going to use the word Tor Hannah, also known by the Celts as Skoda, was an Egyptian priestess and princess of Hebraic Celtic lineage, who in a later incarnation, would assume the life of Mariana, mother of the Christ Yeshua, Jesus. She would be incarnating into her own family, for Mariana was also a direct descendant of this ancient priestess, or princess. Tor Hannah's body is currently in a suspended state within a special vault under the Tor of Glastonbury. This vault is in a dimension slightly removed from ours, but close enough in magnetic resonance that the body is able to maintain the vibrational information of Tor Hannah's blood consciousness within the planetary genetic field. Tor Hannah's father was a shepherd king, the Hyksos of the Mizraim lineage of Egypt, who was on the throne of Zan or Zone when the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt by Osmosis I of the royal family of Kyi'Ra. Was expelled from Egypt by Osmosis I. Now that's the end of that. And then I say, of the royal family of Kyi'Ra, only Tor-Janok or Tor Hannah escaped with her life. Before the expulsion, she was being groomed through high initiation to become the progenitor of a holy family, which was to have arisen in Egypt, the family of Yeshua. Yet only several weeks before the final blow, which took her father and other family members to their grave, did Tor Hannah receive a vision while in deep trance, in which she was told to take the Phialetes, or sacred relics of the Kyi'Ra family, and go into the land of AVALON, British Isles, where she was to establish the kingdom for the royal line of the Holy Family. This next generation was developed from Tor Hannah's descendants, as she had many children. In the British Isles, Tor Hannah was a warrior priestess. She sought harmony, yet in this primitive land of AVALON there was often need to defend her realm. She collected around her 12 women of the shield, who were for the most part a council of peace. They were also what we might call generals in time of war. In 1998, when I went to Glastonbury, I had a profound experience with Tor Hannah. I was sleeping in a bed and breakfast at the foot of the Tor when I suddenly awakened, although I kept my eyes closed. Beneath my lids, I saw a lady, all in electric blue light. She was wearing a long gown with a high waist. Her hair was long, and she had a band around her forehead. With both hands, she seemed to be extending to me a shallow dish. She was perfectly still. Then I heard a crackling sound, and the image disappeared. I opened my eyes to see the same image, which I had been viewing with my eyes closed, was now standing as a normal-sized woman in my room. Her image lasted only moments, and then was gone. It was later revealed to me that this had been a hologram of Torhana, that I held in my DNA as one who had been incarnated with her in that era. My having come to the foot of her vault had triggered the activation of this hologram in my reality. Torhana's form is in a deep state of suspension. The DNA is still active, although the soul of this once fully alive woman continued to incarnate. According to the Akashic record, there are many suspended forms of humans who once walked the earth within numerous sarcophagi in chambers of this earth. This has been accomplished in order for the particular pure gem frequency of their DNA to radiate through the holographic field of the DNA of the human race as it perpetuates itself through time. Torhana lies in her vaulted repose with her sword placed the length of her body. This sword was used in practice of high spiritual magic and now continues to affect the balance of her form in its suspended state. It was not the sword that she might have used in battle. This was a very special one. It is obvious that Torhana is a highly evolved soul. Yet it also need be stressed that this soul entered into the incarnation cycle here on earth. Like Yeshua, Thoth, and other master beings, Torhana's soul embedded itself in this reality, and in doing so, took up the mantle of the world. These beings did not live fairy tale lives. Thoth's first wife, 2 of his children, and his father were murdered. Yeshua was crucified. Torhana saw her parents and siblings killed. Apparently, she actually saw this before she was able to escape. I don't know if she saw it physically or she saw it etherically. I'm kind of thinking maybe she saw it etherically, but that's how I was picking it up. As a warrior queen, it was intended for her to enter into that role in order to redeem it through the tribe she served, to bring them out of the cycle of war and into the round table of peace. This was the soul of the Blessed Virgin. Yet in that incarnation, she was called to enter a realm of battle and commit those acts herself in defense of the realm, but nevertheless bloodshed was on her hands. Yet how could she bring the masses out of this pit had her soul not been willing to enter into it, all the while not losing sight of the victory of light? What greater sacrifice could an illumined soul make for its kindred? I would pause here and say that there were 2 souls of Yeshua, as I've stated before. The one that was with him until the baptism was the Osirian soul who had incarnated before. But the soul that was pure, that from the baptism up to the point of crucifixion, was the soul that had never entered incarnation before on this planet, was the most highly evolved. Then at the time of crucifixion, the Osirian soul came back to help him across, to help him with that act. So the Virgin Mary, according to the Thothic record, is the twin ray of the Osirian soul of Jesus. I'm getting my masters mixed here. And as such, she's still had other lives on this planet, highly evolved soul, but not to the level of the Yeshua soul that had never touched this earth before. And she was going through a process of bringing herself to the right point of experience to be that mother of Yeshua. And that was another very important reason why she accepted the life of Torhana. Now to continue. When she, Torhanna, went into suspension, she was in her early 50s and had borne 11 children. However, due to her star lineage, her I'm sorry, I'm really tiring out here. However, due to her star lineage and her sacred practices, she looked no older than her mid-30s, not all that unlike the image I have selected for her. Well, in my, old artwork using Poser, which it wasn't as accurate as I would have liked it to be. Despite her appearance, bearing 11 children is no simple task. The age and location in which she lived was a harsh and cruel environment. Yes, magic still abounded, and there were mists of Avalon still clinging to the torn curtain, but everyday life was hard and fraught with danger. Torhanna was once captured by a warring king who raped her. She gave birth to his son and then was released back to her people, but the father kept the child. She would be reunited with this son, but not until he was a grown man. Torhanna's life was a saving grace to the land she served. For 56 years after she went into suspension, peace reigned. This may seem small in the balance of the history of the world, but it created a crucial shift in the overview. In other words, those little tiny 56 years allowed certain things to take place that developed into the spiritual presence of humanity as it is today. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the crucial ones that did take place then. And so I have a meditation here, but I'm going to do that on a separate video. I will conclude here, and I certainly hope that this version was recorded. So, back to the warrior queen, Wonder Woman, for our last moments here. I think what we can bring to the fore of all of this is that life, spirituality, what we see as the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things, and how we've always done it, or we think we've always done it, are all very mixed in the true spiritual presence of what is. And that makes us less quick to judge. Now, that is not dismissing the warmongers, the evil, the violence, and all of that stuff that has no place in our world, in our true world, in the world we would wish to reign upon. But we need to be more thoughtful before we just simply chalk someone off as not being up to our standard. And so, with those words, I shall conclude this video. Thank you all for listening.